The Big Ten schedule, what will it look like in 2020? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Big Ten. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. Interesting topic here, Pat. People banting about what schedules could look like in the Power Five. Of course, we know that the Big Ten was out in front, and then the Pac-12 joined in line within a day in announcing no non-conference games, and that the conference play would be reworked. A 9-game season for the Big Ten will be expanded, we believe, to 10 games. And so there's a thought initially that, of course, well, you've already got 9 games scheduled. You just tack on a game, and who's that going to be? Well, it appears as though the conference is going to tear this schedule apart and rebuild the schedule to try to provide pockets of flexibility in case there are issues with positive tests for COVID.
Exactly. The Big Ten, as it was explained to us when we spoke to Gene Smith the same day that they made this announcement, was flexibility was the word he kept using. I think he said it about 7 or 8 times. The conference wants to be able to, if one team can't play one weekend because of positive tests, or a team doesn't feel safe traveling to an area because of spikes in positive tests in that area, not even necessarily within the football team. They want to be able to reschedule these games and do it with some relative ease. The way the schedule shapes up normally, obviously you only have one. Last year they had 2 bye weekends. If you take out the conference games, even if you add one more and go to a 10-game or a non-conference games, and you go to a 10-game conference-only schedule, you still have 3 weeks that provide that flexibility. And while we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, I would imagine that they would try to make each team's schedule very similar so that, if Penn State for some reason can't play, well, you don't have to shift games around mid-season. There's open weekends at the same time for everybody. That's just speculation on my part, but it seems to make a lot of sense. If everyone has different bye weekends, then you're then you're having to twerk things a little bit more. So that's a way to do it. It's not the only way to do it. There's also the question of how early do you start the season? Gene Smith mentioned with the flexibility they have now, you could start as early as those week 0 games that we see the week before Ohio State was supposed to start Labor Day weekend. Then that gives you an additional week, even if you need it. So it'll be interesting to see what the Big Ten does, how they reschedule these games. Do you play all division games early on to get those out of the way before a potential, spike in the fall as you get closer to flu season and whatnot? Who do you add if you go to a 10th game to each team's schedule? Is that about travel, things like that? So there's certainly a lot of things that need to be decided. Gene Smith said that they're not in a huge hurry to get that out there. Now, this was a couple weeks ago. I would imagine that we'd hear something soon. You want to have these teams, where they're going and whatnot. I don't think you'll have to worry too much about fans traveling as you would in a normal schedule, but you certainly want teams to be able to figure out where they're going to be, when they're going to be, those type of things, and plan accordingly. So I think you need to get a schedule out here soon, just so people have that ready to go once the season starts, whenever that is.
And to your point, I think the thought initially was, well, the season's going to have to be pushed back, or most likely it's going to be pushed back, when what you're talking about makes total sense in regards to getting the guys on the field as soon as possible, because then it provides within that 14 to 15 week window to early December the most flexibility if you get games underway as soon as possible in a week 0 that I believe is Saturday, August 29th, rather than waiting past that. Now we'll see what happens with player health between now and then that prepares the league to do so. And of course, fans are thinking first and foremost what games they want to see, or what's going to be the best toward a college football playoff, those sorts of things. You're bringing into the forefront just the logistics of trying to play a reasonable season and trying to figure out what is most functional in building a schedule and what's going to affect what. If this team can't play for this many weeks, how is that going to domino effect across the board? And a lot of logistical concerns come into play, and a lot of pieces of the puzzle have to be put in place that is more about functionality of a schedule rather than, oh, we want Ohio State to go to the playoffs, so let's protect them, or wouldn't it be cool to see rivalries played home and home series? And that's something I proposed. Hey, if we're just going with a 9-game season that's going to be expanded to 10, hey, let's see the old Oak and Bucket played between the cross division Purdue, Indiana. So then that makes 2 6-team divisions because they're playing the home and home. Then you match up the home and homes that we all would want to see: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwestern Illinois, all the rivalry games on the last weekend, but let's play them twice: Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Michigan State, etc., on down the line. But that's not necessarily the most functional. So do you think, Pat, that there's going to be a Michigan-Ohio State game in September?
Yeah, that's something I've seen proposed. Either play that week 1 to make sure you get that game in, or play it twice as you suggested. And I do think there is something to that, even from a functional standpoint. There's already been the major loss of revenue for programs across the country that would have been involved in the NCAA tournament, right? We lost that in the spring. So, ways to help compensate that, especially if you're not going to have fans or limited capacity seating, get some of these big games on TV and make sure they happen. So, I recently wrote something right after this all came out, just a proposed what a schedule could look like. And I put Ohio State, Penn State week 1. Let's get a big game, to start the season. Everyone's excited for college football. We're not getting the Ohio State Oregons or these big non-conference games you thought you were going to get. Let's throw these 2 teams that have, battled these last several years in the Big Ten, 2 of the top teams in the Big Ten East. Let's put them out there right away on the field and see what happens. And, if you wanted to move the Michigan game early, I think Ohio State fans and Michigan fans may riot if that's not the last weekend in November because of tradition. But if you want to put that one early, obviously people are going to tune in for that. And I think you can see that across the country, not just in the Big Ten, with these conferences that go conference-only schedules. Try and get some of those exciting games in early, some of those classic rivalries that you mentioned, just to get people watching, get people when people are definitely excited about college football, and that's going to help everyone out. The TV stations, the programs, the conferences, all that stuff. So I think while that is like a fun dream thing, I do think there's a good reason behind having some of those big games early. And plus, you want to make sure they get played. You don't have to look back at the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry and try and remember in 15, 20 years why there's a missing year. Obviously, you'd like to see that game late in the season when it normally is played. But if it's between not seeing it played this year and seeing it played at a different time, I think I would say, and maybe this is the poor traditionalist in me, but I would say let's play the game as opposed to worrying about, does this happen, does it not? So a lot to figure out. I think you have to take a lot into account. I think that's probably why we haven't heard anything yet, is because the Big Ten's trying to figure out the best way to go about doing this, the safest way to go about doing this. If you add a 10th game, I thought Ohio State, Wisconsin made a lot of sense, but that means a further travel than maybe an Ohio State Purdue, which wouldn't be as exciting, but might be the safer route. So I don't know. It's certainly going to be interesting to see what they come up with and what approach they take. But I think there are reasons to have some of those big games early on in the season.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild card kind of a season regardless. So nothing's off the table. And I think functionality and just trying to get a reasonable schedule in play and played is priority number 1. And when you talk the Ohio State-Michigan dynamic, and I'm bringing this up first and foremost because it's the game in the conference from a traditional standpoint, it's obviously impacts the people that are watching right here that are interested in the game, but it filters down to all the big rivalry games. And one of the reasons I proposed the home and home series was for the attraction that you talked about in regards to, let's recoup some of the money that we've lost. Let's bring attention to our conference, because there may be non-conference games played by the SEC and the ACC that are going to be pretty attractive. So let's try to build up the schedule as much as possible. Plus, if the Ohio State-Michigan game can't be played that one in September, then we still recoup possibly the one in November, or vice versa. We got it in September. We can't play the home and home and complete it in November. Then at least we got one of the 2 scheduled games in. And then if we play a home and home series, we'll look back 15 or 20 years from now and say, that wasn't that crazy. They played a home and home Ohio State-Michigan series one time.
Well, and you mentioned the college football playoff earlier, and obviously that's a ways down the line, and there's a lot that has to go right between now and then. But if we're being optimistic here, and I think we are, we hoped that they can crown a Big Ten champion, and then there'll be teams in the playoff, and they'll be able to do that, whatever it looks like. Well, if you have 2 wins over Michigan, if you're an Ohio State team, that looks pretty good. You lost that potential big time win against Oregon. So whether it be Michigan, Penn State, any of these bigger name teams, if they do decide to play games twice or something like that, you want your schedule, you want your record to look as good as possible. And in the Big Ten, I think there's only a few of those teams, at least in the Big Ten East, that you're going to have that opportunity against. So maybe that does help your strength of schedule. And even if you lose one of those games in a tight game, we talk about sometimes in those early non-conference games, maybe that helps you down the road if it's a close win or a close loss in Ann Arbor for Ohio State. I know fans are going to be upset for me even bringing that up, but I'm just talking from a strength of schedule standpoint. There could be reasons to do that as well if the Big Ten is even thinking that far ahead.
Or if you're talking about the most attractive matchups based on what we've seen the last going back to 2016, and if you're talking about location as well, you're looking at Michigan State maybe being the home and home, and Ohio State and Penn State being the home and home.
Yeah, and that route. Right, and that would be a fun one. Obviously, those games are going to all feel a little different if you don't have fans. And we've talked before about what Ohio State's trip to Happy Valley was going to be like without the whiteout. But seeing Ohio State, Penn State play twice in a season would be interesting. This, like I said before, these are 2 teams that have contested the most for the Big Ten East since the conference went to those divisions. And I expect them to be the 2 top teams again this year. So seeing that game twice would be interesting. And Ohio State wasn't supposed to host Penn State this year, but bringing them to the Horseshoe would just add another dynamic to the season.
And maybe we'll see 2 comebacks from double-digit deficits and wins by 1 point by Ohio State. It'll happen twice this season. Penn State fans are going to hate me for saying that. All right, lock it in here. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We talk the game we love each and every day with live streams. If you subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, when we're going live. Pat Murphy joins us on a regular basis to talk Ohio State football. Join him and the rest of the crew there at Bucknuts on 247 Sports. Pat, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
For sure. Thanks for having me.